Hey guys, today I am down in windy Southern California trying to answer a very tricky question. If you have $66,900, well, let's be honest, because including destination, it's going to be more like 68 grand, and you love 4Runners, should you get the new Trailhunter or should you get yourself a new 2025 TRD Pro? Let's take a look at the features, why you might want one over the other, and why I think the answer might be Land Cruiser for some folks out there. Obviously, they are very similar vehicles. These are the 4Runners in the lineup that not only are the most off-road capable, but also the most feature-rich, with features like the LED light bar up front that you can see illuminated in this model. You activate it with the high beams. Of course, there's some other settings required to activate that. And because these are off-road focused vehicles, we have the cutout bumpers, so you can see that helps improve the approach angle right there. Over here in the Trailhunter, you see very much the same shape. Over here, we have the light bar turned off, but the fog lights in their amber position, so you can see what that looks like, because they are color changeable fog lights. Big Toyota logo right there. Of course, we have the 360-degree camera system here, radar sensors, full LED headlights, etc. But when you start looking closer, you'll notice some of the differences. We don't have a hood scoop over here in the Trailhunter. Now, admittedly, we don't really have one over here in the TRD Pro either, because this is just a styling element. Now, under the hood, basically the same thing's going on. So I'll let Travis come in for a closer look as I go ahead and open the hood, because under here, we find only the iForce Max hybrid system. So very much the same as the one that we find in the Tacoma, of course, and the Land Cruiser. We get 326 horsepower, a whopping amount of torque, and a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. But importantly, we don't find a full-time four-wheel drive system. Instead, both of these use the part-time system that we find in the rest of the 4Runner lineup and most of the Tacomas as well. I have to admit, that is the one thing that I would have been interested to see as far as a differentiator between these two vehicles would be, for instance, maybe a full-time system in the Trailhunter and a part-time system in the TRD Pro, but that's not what we see here. Now, Toyota calls this the ultimate overlanding 4Runner, whereas the TRD Pro is more of a desert runner, more of a serious rock climber, etc. But as we come around to the side, you'll notice some of the key differences. Over here in the Trailhunter, we find matte plastic wheel arches. These are my preference for off-roading. You can see this one's already been scraped up a little bit out on the trail. Those scrapes are going to be less visible on a matte plastic section, whereas on the TRD over there, they're all shiny black plastic. We also have the desert air intake, aka snorkel, integrated into the side. That is not something we find in the TRD Pro. Other changes around the side, you can see we have the rock sliders over here on this model, sort of a tubular design. And if we come all the way around to the TRD Pro, again, we get the shiny black plastic wheel arches. Here they look matte, but that's just because they're dirty. You'll notice we don't get rock sliders from the factory under there, so that is definitely a key difference. Then we get black wheels, actually the same Toyo open country all-terrain tires on both of them. Just a regular sort of roof, not roof rails, but the roof attachments on the sides. No load bars, sorry, just roof rails there. We get the same 6,000 pounds of towing capability, 2-inch hitch receiver right down there. We get the powered rear window and yes, a windshield wiper. Now over here, these wheels are pretty dusty, but so it's hard to see, but they're actually kind of a gold colored wheel. Again, same open country Toyo all-terrain tire there. Better look at the rock sliders from that position. But up here, we get an ARB roof platform, essentially. This is more than just cross rails. It's actually more of an adjustable slider roof system. So that's definitely a key differentiator between the two. A little bit less obvious is the fact that we get different skid plates in the vehicles, although the protection level is basically the same. Then we get some very different suspension components. So we have the ARB Old Man Emu setup here in this model for the dampers, all remote reservoir, of course, both in this and in the TRD Pro, but different tuning to the suspension. It's not a world of difference out on the trail. I do think that this is a little bit softer, as you'd expect for something that you're going to spend more time in, whereas the TRD Pro is a little bit firmer because Toyota says that one was set up to allow jumping. Since the hybrid system is standard, we get less cargo capacity standard in these models than in the rest of the lineup. That's because of where the battery is located. As you can see, The cargo compartment is a little bit higher off the ground. We do get a small storage area right there, and rather unusually also a small storage area between the battery and the rear seat backs. But importantly, we get 2.4 kilowatts of onboard inversion and a 20 amp 110 volt outlet back there. So you should be able to run not only refrigerators, but also things like microwaves if you want to go overlanding and you want to take your microwave with you instead of, camping with a camp stove. Over here in the 4Runner, basically the same thing is going on. We have the power glass there, rear wiper, of course. Inside, it may be a little bit easier to tell what's going on in this model because we don't have the net in place, but that's that small storage cubby right back there. On the inside, the big deal with the Trailhunter is the unique interior design. So we find the orange or yellow accents right there on the dashboard and what kind of looks like a Formica countertop. I think this style is more my taste than even the red interior in the TRD Pro, which I think does look really good. It's not just the orange accents or the Formica part, but it's also this sort of wet concrete colored leather. We get 4-way adjustable lumbar support for the driver and front passenger. That piping and stitching there, heated and ventilated seats. As you can see, the same 4-wheel drive controls there in the center console. The same huge 14-inch LCD touchscreen infotainment system here, which definitely has some advantages if we're talking about off-roading. So I'll talk about this more in a bit in the drive section, but because this screen is so large, it's really easy to see what's going on around the vehicle. Whether we're talking about the 360-degree views or the forward or side-looking views, if you're on-road, off-road, etc., it's just really easy to see what's going on, especially with some of these views here, where you can see a transparent view of the vehicle as it's driving along. So if we inch forward here, I'll let Travis just sort of inch forward. You can see that kind of like a roller shade, it's going to actually start showing us what's underneath the vehicle. You see right there, we now have enough data to show that. And the bigger screen makes that more useful than, say, what we find in the Land Cruiser. Then we have the big LCD cluster over there on that side, but this dashboard functionally is the same as the one in the TRD Pro with the added style of the gray components, which, I think actually are the best looking trim in the new 4Runner. On the inside, the design is very similar between the two. Now, if you want to know more about the 4Runner in general for this generation, be sure and check out our other video where we take a deep dive into the other trims in the lineup. In the TRD Pro, this model does not have the red seats, but they all have this really interesting camo design. It's difficult to see in this lighting. Maybe if I go down here, yeah, the camera can see this a little bit better. You can see the camo pattern. It's actually inside the perforations for the seat. That's a really cool touch. The TRD Pro gets red accents on the inside. So the Toyota logo here on the dashboard, red accents there. We get a red stripe on the shifter. We get a red TRD start button right there and a red stripe on the steering wheel as well. But mechanically, very similar. So if we look down here, for instance, you can see right now we're in 4 low. We also get 4 high and 2 high. That's because, again, this is a part-time system. We then have DAC, crawl control, mud terrain, multi-terrain select here, the drive modes, tow haul mode. You rotate around through those options with that dial and you select what you want to rotate through by pressing those buttons. We then have the stabilizer bar or sway bar disconnect feature, something we've seen in Jeeps for a while. We now see that here. Rear locker, no front locker, 360-degree camera. You can see the augmented reality view circling around there on that screen. We also over here have the integrated trailer brake controller in this model. Auxiliary switches to the left of the driver. That's a really handy touch. The control for the light bar, that is down there. Out on the road and out on the trail, the Trailhunter and the TRD Pro, they're both off-road dedicated versions of the 4Runner, but not exactly the same kind of off-roading, although, pretty close, to be honest, right, Travis?
They are, and what's interesting here is that this is the first time the Trailhunter, it's still a very new trim in Toyota's lineup, is coming to the 4Runner, but there aren't as many differentiations between the 4Runner, TRD Pro, and Trailhunter as we get in the Tacoma. Yeah. The biggest thing here is going to be the suspension differences.
Yeah, and it's a really minor difference, to be honest. We do get different shocks. And there's still a remote reservoir, which is definitely going to be handy if you're going to spend a lot of time out on a trail like this, especially at higher speeds where you are going to need that extra cooling. Aside from that, we have basically the same functionality. We have the disconnectable sway bars here, which is something that we haven't seen in Toyotas for a while. We have the locking rear differential. Of course, we have the crawl control, the drive modes. Let's go ahead and crawl us some control. Because this is one of the big improvements for this generation of 4Runner is, like the Tacoma, crawl control so much smoother than it was before. And I'll crawl this at its lowest crawl. There's still a bit of a stop and go kind of herky-jerky thing going on. But previously, to be honest, I always found Toyota's crawl control so odd to use that it was just unusable in my opinion. I just would never have actually used it. Right now we're waiting for the traction control system to try and send power around. I don't have the rear diff locked, so we're just depending on the software to handle the control here. I think it's a really good balance, especially if you plan on doing some rugged overlanding. The question, I guess, would be in a way is, how do you feel about this versus something, like a Grand Cherokee Trailhawk, which of course has an adaptive air suspension system with an awful lot of clearance?
Yeah, I think the one thing the Trailhawk isn't going to have that these dual 4Runner options are is going to be the ability and the encouragement to jump the Trailhawk, which you do get that sort of equipment on the TRD Pro. Compared to the Trailhunter itself, it's not a huge difference, although I will say it does not come with a factory high air intake. This Trailhunter obviously does, but between the two, it's not an enormous difference.
Out on the trail, out on the road, it's going to be as minor, I would say, to be perfectly honest, as it really is, in person, like we were talking about earlier. So both are going to have the hybrid system, standard. So both 0 to 60 in about 7 seconds. Yep. So a little bit slower than the rest of the hybrid lineup, likely because of the hardware that we have on board, the tires, the skid plates, etc. It's a little bit heavier. Now, one thing that is interesting is that Trailhunter and TRD Pro get the part-time four-wheel drive system, not a full-time four-wheel drive system like we find in Land Cruiser or actually even the limited trim.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Obviously, the limited is going to have that function, but it's not built for this sort of use on a regular basis, where the Land Cruiser obviously is going to be a little more trail-oriented. I don't see that as a big thing. I mean, the benefit here is that you can get better fuel economy when you're driving it on the road, and you flip it in when you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hair, but something is better than nothing.
Right. The thing for me though is I love the ability. I love the full-time systems because they have a true center differential, and you can flip between having that coupling locked or have it unlocked. And on a tighter trail than the one that we're on here, you may want to have four-wheel drive still. You have that extra traction, but you don't want to tear up the trail, or you just need to cut that corner tighter. And the turning radius, it did get quite a bit bigger in this generation.
Yeah, I mean, everything in here did, the dimensions changed just ever so slightly. Tearing up the trail is obviously not something anyone wants to do, especially if they do it on a consistent basis. If that's what they're getting this for, is for that trail driving. But it's still going to do what you need it to. So I don't know if I fault it if you said, hey, that it really is important to me, or my specific driving conditions are so much better with a full-time all-wheel drive, then you could get a limited and you could put some knobbier tires. You're just not going to get the same sort of suspension.
Or rationally, you could get that Land Cruiser.
Or you could get that Land Cruiser.
And that's logically why I think Toyota went this direction, is that there is Land Cruiser, there's GX, and of course there's LX if you want to spend even more. But Land Cruiser and GX both have the full-time system. So if you really want that, and it's a great feel, I have to tell you. It's like my Grenadier does that too, where you can lock it, you can unlock it, you're always in four-wheel drive. It's a fantastic idea, especially for a vehicle with a relatively large turning radius like this, and the Grenadier both, because it helps them be more nimble out on this sort of trail. And it is worth noting that part of the difference in the turning circle for this is the wheelbase. It's got 2 inches longer, but Grand Cherokee, pretty long wheelbase, it actually has a turning circle smaller than this, notably smaller actually. We're obviously going to go over some rocks here where we're going to get a little bit of direction. So let's see what...
Making sure we keep the new car new.
Yeah, make sure we don't hit any rocks here. So we'll see. Apparently we're doing what we're doing here. This is where I will say I do find the throttle a little bit jumpier than I might like, likely due to the electric motor. It's not quite as linear as the V6 in the old model. Much better mechanical advantage though, as I said earlier, much better crawl ratio. But it is smoother than the 4xe system in the Grand Cherokee, in that has no torque converter. So you are relying only on the electric motor at lower speeds if you're off-roading. So if you are in this, a very limited camp, I would say, that's considering 4xe versus something like this, you should keep some of those differences in mind. This more traditional hybrid system is a little bit more traditional in feel, even though design-wise, it's actually quite like the 4xe system.
So Alex, we've talked about some of the differences, some of the features that they have, but the fact of the matter is there are still two different trims, a TRD Pro and a Trailhunter. My question to you is, who do you think is looking for one or the other, and why should they consider, any of them?
Yeah, I have to admit that is a tricky question because they are so similar, even though they have different components. They have different skid plates, but they cover the same areas, and they are, roughly similar in look and function and feel, etc. We do have the desert air intake, aka snorkel here,
And gold wheels.
And gold wheels. This is logically apart styling. So do you like the style of this one better than that one? And then a little bit of function. The thought process here is this is a bit more geared towards overlanding, which is why we have the roof rack on top, the roof platform kind of look there. Very similar load capacities, very similar payload. Obviously, these are both pre-production models, so we don't have door stickers to reference, but they should be very, very similar in terms of payload, etc. It's really just going to come down to personal preference because the price tag, that's also identical. Now, if you listen to Toyota describe the differences between the two, they would say that TRD Pro is more for the person that's going to go rock crawling, maybe jumping, that sort of thing. I don't imagine too many people playing Raptor level tricks with their 4Runner, but
probably not.
If you wanted to go in that direction, that's where that is. Whereas this is sort of for the crowd that maybe has had a Subaru in the past and wants to take the level up to 11. They want to go way beyond what you could do in a Subaru. They are interested in reliability, obviously, which is why they're not Wranglering or Broncoing. They want to keep the doors on. They don't want to have a convertible because they'd rather have a roof tent, something like that. But it is also logically for that person that doesn't think they need a locking front axle. And that is something that you will find in a Bronco or in a Wrangler. And you won't find here. You also won't find a solid axle in the front of this, which is, I kind of would like to see a 4Runner with a solid axle.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be pushing it farther into the category of off-road oriented, right? And there would be some downsides to that.
Definitely. And,
daily drivability would be part of that. But,
yep.
But
you'd get death wobble. The potential for it, et cetera. One of the reasons we don't have solid fronts in a lot of vehicles out there.
Do you think they'd ever do a one-off trim with that? I mean, I can imagine just the money for that one setup is probably not where it should go, but they could at least dip their toes in the water and see if that's the direction they should take it moving forward.
I would say I doubt it, but I would not be surprised if the aftermarket has some solution for you, because there are, for instance, Bronco solid axle swaps up front. Definitely worth that. Now, the other question, of course, is the price tag. At about $69,000 approximately for either of these two options, why would you not just get a Land Cruiser?
To answer that question very shortly, I probably just would get a Land Cruiser. For daily drivability, just the space, what's in front of me, I like sitting in the Land Cruiser. For folks in the back, I don't fit in that back particularly well. I'd probably get a Land Cruiser. The full-time all-wheel drive absolutely has its benefits, and at least on paper, fuel economy is even a little bit better than we get here with this similar hybrid system. So I would probably get a Land Cruiser.
And the screen is going to be a difference there. This one does have this big, huge 14-inch screen, and the cameras on it, I think actually this works really well because of the size of the screen. Yep. And in the Land Cruiser, you just don't have quite as much visibility for off-roading. But yeah, I agree. It's probably a really great thing for Toyota to not care about, I guess, in a way.
What a problem to have.
Right, what a problem to have is your shopper has two choices, and if they're not going to A, they're going to B. Toyota wants to make sure you have every nook and cranny covered. So guys, let us know out there, which would you pick if you were looking to spend, honestly, let's say $70,000. Yep. Would you go for something like this, or would you get a Grand Cherokee Overland for a decent amount less? So if your budget was about $70,000, which would you choose? Would you Trailhunter or would you TRD Pro? Keeping in mind they are the exact same price. Depending on how you look at it, you get a little bit more in the Trailhunter, in my opinion, because we get the desert air intake and we get the roof rack, which I think is fantastic. You also don't get the shiny black bits, which I really dislike on the outside of an off-road vehicle. I think they're going to get scratched really easily if you do take it actually off-road. Logically, the reason to get this over, of course, just getting a regular 4Runner and modifying it yourself is that all of these modifications are going to be covered by Toyota's regular warranty. So if you're worried about the light bar or add-on fog lights not working over time, you're worried about electrical gremlins, don't worry about these factory components. They carry the same warranty, of course. Now, suspension tuning, I think I prefer the Trailhunter a little bit over the TRD Pro, but really we're talking variations on a theme. They are very, very similar. Also similar, of course, is the Land Cruiser with the addition of that full-time four-wheel drive system, which again is the one thing I would love to see on a Trailhunter. Let me know what you think about all that and which you would pick down there in the comments section below. We will see all of you later, and hopefully it is not this windy wherever you are. Bye.